Okay, let's make sure I'm live before we get started here. Hope everyone's having a nice Friday. I had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend, went camping in a town in Colorado called Buena Vista. It was just wonderful and no rain. Just one moment. Let's see here. Once I know I'm live, we'll get started. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Looks like I'm live. And great. All right. Well, welcome. I'm Josie, the autoimmune expert, and welcome to my channel. Now, before we get started today, for those who are new out there, new listeners or viewers, I want you to get a better idea of who I am. I'm an individual who used to have 8 autoimmune diseases and a host of chronic illnesses before I came to where I work now, which is a new life center. Starting in my teens and into my 20s, I developed illnesses like rheumatoid arthritis, MS, Hashimoto's, lupus, and I also had conditions such as ADD, and I had an eating disorder, depression, and anxiety. And like many out there, I tried so many different modalities of healing. I tried Western medicine, I did food diets, alternative medicine, I did herbs, I did supplements, cleanses, all kinds of different modalities, and I continued to get worse. And by the time I was 28 and was developing signs of MS, it was very clear to me that what I was doing wasn't working. And so where I came to, a new life center, was the first place that helped me understand that the missing factor in my healing was me, that it was my emotional state. And actually my emotional state created by my belief in trauma, which we'll talk about today, that was creating my illnesses. When I resolved my emotional state and moved into camp take responsibility, I permanently healed all of my autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses. I am 10 years completely healthy. I am not in remission. I do no food diets. I take no supplements or medication. And this is the very path I take my students down, a path of true and permanent healing from autoimmune disease and chronic illness. Now, I have a very important topic today. And this video, it was actually inspired by a recent interview I watched with Mel Robbins and Gabor Mate, where he shares extensively about his belief on the connection between emotional trauma, autoimmune diseases, ADHD, and addiction. The title of today's video is The Dark and Dangerous Trauma Message of Gabor Mate. Now, Gabor Mate is huge right now in our media. He's a Canadian medical doctor. He's a world-renowned expert on trauma, stress, addiction, and childhood. He's a New York Times bestselling author, self-help guru, and he is best known for his groundbreaking work connecting trauma and disease. And it has risen him to global prominence. I was the poster child for his trauma message. I grew up in a family with alcohol and drug abuse, and my dad died when I was 15. My mom was very cold and distant, and I lived in a very highly chaotic and fractured household. I didn't have parents parenting me. There wasn't nurturing. Love was very absent. And as a result, over the years, I was diagnosed with ADD, autoimmune diseases, an eating disorder, and became an alcoholic, and was also suicidal. Tried to kill myself twice, and this all happened before I turned 20. And today, I'm going to share with you why Gabor Mate's message on trauma is so dangerous, so problematic, and so dark. Now, first, we need to establish what is trauma. And now this is according to the APA, which is the American Psychological Society, the defining board of psychology and psychiatry, who says that trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, crime, natural disaster, or experiencing or witnessing violence or war. Trauma is best characterized as a catastrophic stressor that is outside the range of normal human experience. Trauma is not something a healthy, normal person can reasonably expect to cope with in their life. So in contrast to the definition of trauma, Gabor Mate's perspective suggests that the emotional wounds of trauma are not just the result of specific traumatic events, but are also come from a lack of emotional support, safety, and the ability to have needs met, particularly during the formative years of childhood. Here's the traumatic problem with Gabor Mate's definition of trauma that has become pervasive in our modern culture and therapeutic world. This definition gives any therapist or individual permission to customize and tailor their life circumstances to fit into his definition of traumatic. Based upon his definition, every human can reasonably assume that their life experiences have been traumatic. Gabor Mate is making the human experience a diagnosable condition, that we are all wounded and have been deprived. That is the definition of dark. Gabor Mate believes that our life is predetermined based on our childhood. He paints a picture of hopelessness and destitute for mankind. Trauma is the trap, and he is dooming mankind. Now, the truth is, the human experience is a continuum of hurt and pain and loss. And every human has the inherent capacity to be resilient, the ability to be adaptive to life stressors and challenges, and bounce back, and reasonably cope with these normal and common human experiences in a healthy way, if given the choice. This is the reality of life. But what is the choice that we need to be given to escape the diabolical trap of trauma? The choice is to know that we have a choice. To live in camp victim and live in the illusion of a reality that makes us powerless to past circumstances and events, or to live in camp take responsibility, where our lives are created by our choices and decisions, and that our past has no power over these choices and decisions we are free to make as grown-up adults. Now let's talk more about camp victim and trauma and why it is so dark and dangerous. Trauma lives in camp victim. Gabor Mate is the cult leader of camp victim. Let me define what camp victim is. Camp victim is a matrix that fosters the belief that we are victims to the circumstances of our life, that it is our environment, our upbringing, and family of origin that determines our behaviors and future life experiences. In camp victim, we are prisoners of our past, powerless to the events and circumstances of our life. Trauma lives in Camp Victim because trauma is inescapable, a consequence outside of our control. All chronic illnesses are born in Camp Victim. Unhealthy people have trauma in their lives and live wounded from the past. They are powerless. Healthy people are resilient and learn and grow from the challenges of life. They are empowered. Let's revisit Gabor Mate's rise to fame based upon his connection between trauma and disease. The dark and dangerous message of Gabor Mate is that he is teaching people how to create illness and disease by characterizing their normal and common life experiences as traumatic. As I previously shared, trauma is deeply entrenched in Camp Victim, which is the breeding ground of all illness and disease. Unhealthy people live their lives through the lens of trauma. Healthy people live their lives through the lens of resilience, the ability to be adaptive to life's stressors and challenges, and bounce back. I am proof that being resilient to life's challenges and living in Camp Take Responsibility is the path to health and wellness. As I mentioned earlier, I used to live entrenched in Camp Victim with my trauma stories and my emotional wounds. My trauma story was that my dad passed away when I was 15. There was drug and alcohol abuse in my house. We moved homes and schools, and that I lived in a home that lacked maternal love and nurturing, that my parents would fight a lot and my dad would yell. This story was reinforced and labeled as trauma by therapists starting when I was in high school. And so I lived emotionally trapped in my trauma story, living in Camp Victim and unable to heal. Over the next 10 years, I developed 8 autoimmune diseases, such as MS, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, and CVID, and also chronic illnesses, such as an eating disorder, depression and anxiety, ADD, and alcoholism. I thought my past trauma caused my illnesses. I didn't realize that it was my belief that my common life experiences were traumatic is what made me emotionally trapped, powerless, and wounded, which was actually what caused and created my illness and diseases. When I came to where I now work, a New Life Center, 10 years ago, it was the first time I learned I had a choice of what camp to live in, that I had a choice in how I viewed my life experiences. I realized that my deep entrenchment in Camp Victim, in my past life experiences being traumatic, was keeping me mentally and physically sick and unable to heal. I chose to give up my victim and my trauma story and live as a normal and well-adjusted person in Camp Take Responsibility, realizing that I am and have been a product of my choices, not a victim of my circumstances. that I choose the life I lead. I choose my health, and that my life and upbringing was not traumatic, but normal and common life experiences. And it was up to me to grow from them and to choose to be resilient and create my life. Moving to Camp Take Responsibility was the most profound and life-changing choice I have ever made. With this simple yet profound choice to turn my back on my trauma narrative and embrace a healthy and normal life and Camp Take Responsibility, I finally healed. My everlasting wounds of my past healed. I became empowered again. I became emotionally healthy and resilient. And most importantly, my chronically sick body began to heal. And in 6 months' time, after making the choice to move into Camp Take Responsibility and undoing the brainwashing of Gabor Mate and the therapeutic world's trauma message, my body made a full recovery, permanently healed all 8 of my autoimmune diseases and all of my chronic illnesses. Trauma was keeping me trapped and sick. Moving into Camp Take Responsibility gave me freedom and full healing. I am 10 years completely healed now of all of my illnesses, 10 years in Camp Take Responsibility, and 10 years free of the dark and dangerous trap of trauma. You now have a choice. Which camp do you want to live in? Your health and well-being depends on it. If you're out there and you have an autoimmune disease or a chronic illness, and you know you are entrenched in camp victim in the dark and dangerous trauma message that we have been fed and brainwashed by our therapeutic world and by individuals like Gabor Mate, and you're ready to finally heal and break free, to take your power back and your emotional freedom and allow your body to heal once again. Well, I have 2 programs that do that move individuals from camp victim and into Camp Take Responsibility to heal. The 13-week self-guided programs, the autoimmune healing program, and the chronic illness healing program. And it truly is a step-by-step guide to move from camp victim to Camp Take Responsibility, and from the sympathetic nervous system, where we have our illnesses, to the parasympathetic, where our body permanently heals itself. These programs all work without the need for medication, supplements, or food diets, and this is the exact same path I took over 10 years ago. And if you're curious about either of those courses, down below, I have a link to apply for a complimentary consultation with me. And I look forward to meeting you and sharing with you the journey from camp victim with trauma to Camp Take Responsibility and into the full and permanent healing of our autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses, free from that trap of trauma. Thank you so much for joining me today.